I've just arrived in New York to take part in a two-day parliamentary hearing at the United Nations about the global economic crisis and how we will rebuild the world's economy coming out of it. And in particular, the session that I've been asked to be on the panel for is one about how we rebuild a green economy and look at some of the economic models that we have used and whether they will continue to be as relevant. That's particularly because I'm very involved in the UK Parliament in the all-party parliamentary group on wellbeing economics, which challenges some of the economic assumptions. GDP, for example, has risen hugely over the last 50 years, but studies show we're actually no happier and don't have higher levels of well-being as a result. Parliamentarians will be here from all around the world, and tomorrow morning the first session opens with a speech from Ban Ki-moon. So I'm going to try and make sure I keep you posted throughout with little short videos.
So here I am at the United Nations headquarters, and you can see all the flags lined up of all the different nations, and this big building there is the sweeping architecture of the United Nations chamber itself. But the thing that really surprised me last time I came to the UN was that apart from being plush, it's quite the opposite. Most of the offices are in this very, very, very tall office block, which inside is just like some kind of 1950s or 60s pretty normal office block. So that's where most of the work and officers actually do their stuff.
It's lunchtime of day one of the parliamentary hearing, and this morning we heard an international overview of the responses to the global economic crisis. There was quite a lot of criticism of the IMF and the World Bank, particularly by some of the smaller countries, and we've got 45 different nations represented here. There was also criticism that the G20 has been seen as taking the lead on economic issues, while obviously it contains the biggest economies within the world. A lot of the smaller countries said that it doesn't have the same global legitimacy because it is unrepresentative of the United Nations community as a whole. So one of the things which was very interesting was that there was a commission of experts led by Professor Joseph Stiglitz, who's a Nobel Prize winning economist, and he presented a report in September recommending a new Global Economic Cooperation Council, and that would actually have a much better representation of the different types of countries around the world, be larger than the G20, perhaps with around 27 countries represented on it, it was being suggested, and so that's one of the interesting ideas that might be taken forward. Other issues that were touched on this morning included the social responsibility aspect of the crisis, and also how unemployment tends to take perhaps 2 to 4 years longer than output to recover from recession, which suggests that we've still got quite a lot of pain to go through.
I wonder where the UK flag is. Found it alphabetically, so close to the US flag.
Yesterday afternoon's session on delivering the green economy was a really interesting one, although I was thrown into the deep end slightly when, as well as speaking from the panel, they asked me if I would moderate the session. So for 3 hours I was chairing the meeting of 120 odd parliamentarians from 45 different countries, but it all went really well. Some of the things that particularly stuck out for me in the discussion was the representative from Canada pointing out that the cost of doing nothing about climate change would end up being very expensive indeed, which obviously chimes very much with what Sir Nicholas Stern said in his review a couple of years ago. The representative from Switzerland also posed a couple of rhetorical questions, which I have to confess I don't know the answer to, which was, why are the peasants who produce our food the poorest and the bankers the richest? So answers on a postcard for that one if you've got any theories on that. And the biggest sort of issue that seemed to come out through the discussions, which was obviously looking at how we tackle climate change between the developed and developing countries. And obviously a lot of the countries that were there were very small countries who are struggling to make sure that their residents have food, basic healthcare, basic education, shelter and safety. And for them, spending a lot of money on different low-carbon technologies is going to be incredibly difficult. So the issues of technology transfer, where richer countries can pass on technologies to poorer countries without them having to pay expensive patents and so on, was obviously one of the things that came up, but also just who should bear the responsibility for dealing with the problems of climate change. Now, on a moral level, it's quite straightforward in that the emissions that are up there in the atmosphere at the moment came overwhelmingly from the developed world, from the Industrial Revolution, from countries like the UK, the US and Europe, and so it really should be our responsibility. But at the same time, as I pointed out, if those developing countries follow the same path and the same mistakes that we did by going through their development in terms of using dirty fossil fuels and technology which isn't energy efficient, then we're all going to suffer, because there's no way that the emissions that the Earth will produce with a population of 9 billion people, if everybody is living as we have done in, say, the UK for the past few decades, there's no way that that will be a trajectory towards a safe level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So I think this really touched on some of the nub of the negotiations that will be going on in Copenhagen, which obviously is taking place next month. So hopefully the people that were at the debate will have been energised to go back to their specific parliaments and lobby the ministers who will be at Copenhagen, and we have to very much hope that a strong deal will be agreed. So day 2 is about to begin, off to address the social impact of the economic crisis, and then we've got a sort of wrap-up session in the afternoon, although I unfortunately have to leave about an hour before the end to catch my flight back to Edinburgh. I will try to get another couple of bits of film at the UN headquarters today, and in particular there's one thing I'm looking out for which really struck me last time I visited.
Day 2 was fascinating. We heard in the morning about the social impact of the crisis and the warning that we could be heading towards another problem with developing countries and huge debt mountains. We heard that, for example, in Ghana, farmers there are being undercut by European chicken and United States rice, both ending up cheaper than those produced in Ghana because the EU and the US heavily subsidise those products. Under World Bank lending rules, Ghana's not allowed to, so although their farmers are more efficient, they can't compete and their livelihoods suffer. In the afternoon there was someone there from the World Bank, and although I had to leave before the end, I don't think he was going to get a very easy time. It's not a universally popular institution. But I did say there was something else I wanted to share from last time I went to the UN, and I managed to nip out at lunchtime and take this short bit of film. This is the statue of St. Agnes from Nagasaki in Japan, 1945. This stone statue of St. Agnes was found face down in the ruins of Utakami Tenshudo, a Roman Catholic cathedral that was totally destroyed when the atomic bomb exploded in Nagasaki, Japan. The charring and mottling on the back of the statue were caused by the intense heat and radiation. The cathedral was located a half-kilometre from the epicentre of the explosion on the 9th of August 1945. I found looking at this statue incredibly moving. On one side you can see all of the features perfectly made out, and this was the side that was face down. But on the back you can suddenly see how the horrendous impact of a nuclear weapon melted the stone, and it's unimaginable to even consider that amount of heat and power and what it must have been like for those individuals that were caught up in that terror, even very far away from where the bomb itself hit. And I have to say, the United Nations certainly has its faults, but I think we need to remember why it's there. In particular, I liked this quote, which said, "The UN was not created to take humanity to heaven, but to save it from hell." And I think that's quite poignant, really, and I very much hope that while it has its imperfections, we can use this international institution to stop the world tipping over that precipice into hell in all the different manifestations that might be, whether it's conflict or poverty or environmental destruction.